Hi there, this is Colin McGarry with Walking D-Day. Now, following up to the video on Bluecoat, we're following the 43rd Wessex in their advance to Mont Pinçon. In Bluecoat, the 43rd Wessex was supposed to be the spearhead of the attack. The first objective for the 43rd Wessex was the Bois, Homme, which had .361 in it. Now, they had a slow start, they held up, but an unexpected bombing raid just north of Brigade allowed the Somerset Light Infantry to advance 1,000 yards, and then they stayed where they were in some thick woods for the rest of the day. On their right, the 7th Hampshires moved along each side of the road towards Carhagnes. Held up by many mines, they were nevertheless on the slopes near Carhagnes by midnight. The Germans made many counterattacks during the night, but an attack by the 4th Dorsets allowed the 7th Hampshires to move into Carhagnes on the 31st of July. Now, the distance, we can see the Bois, Homme, Hill 361, which was their first objective. And that way, we can see Mont Pinçon in the far distance. That was their final objective.
If you appreciate the videos, you can support the channel in several ways. The easiest is to click like, make a comment, or subscribe, which is free. You can also go a step further with Patreon or PayPal. Links in the description.
The left flank of the 43rd was open because the 50th hadn't taken Hussars yet on its way to Villers Bocage. The 7th Somerset Light Infantry rode on the top of the Dragoon Guards tanks, and they went through Carhagnes. They were in St. Pierre-du-Frêne the evening of the 31st. Hearing the noise of tanks and a report of a tiger having been seen, Major Whitehead went out to stalk it, and when he saw it was accompanied by a few hundred infantry. He called in an artillery stonk onto it, which dispersed the group, but they were still attacked. 2 Jagdpanthers arrived at the front lines. One was abandoned after being hit, but the tank was still advancing. The other one reversed after being blinded by a phosphorus shell. Now, behind me to the east is Hill 226, that's held by the Guards, and there's Hill 309, held by the Guards. And then just south of that was the Bois, Homme, Hill 361, which was the 43rd's objective, and they didn't get there till 2 days late. The Wiltshires, the 129th Brigade, now moved on to Bois, Homme. The torrential rain made most of the paths practically impossible. On the summit, they were attacked by 3 Jagdpanthers. One was knocked out by a Piat, another one was knocked out, and one got bogged down. But it wasn't until the 2nd of August that the Bois, Homme and Hill 361 were actually under control, 2 days after schedule. With the 30th Corps being behind schedule, the 8th Corps became the main thrust of Operation Bluecoat. The Guards, with the 15th Scottish, had attained their objectives of Hill 226 and Hill 309. But on the 1st of August, the Coldstream Guards on Hill 309 bore the brunt of a vicious attack from the Germans on the Bois, Homme. That was the day before the Wessex took it. The Mont Pinçon, the highest point in Normandy, still had to be captured. Von Kluge had to try and stem this British breakout, and at the same time organised Operation Lutish, which was to be a massed panzer attack against Avranches going through Mortain to cut off the American supplies and stop their breakout into Brittany. The 50th Northumberland Division would take Villers Bocage, or the ruins of it, on the 4th of August. 6 weeks earlier, they were backing the 7th Armoured Division, which had gone through Villers Bocage unopposed, and then met the newly arrived detachment of Tiger tanks led by Michael Whitman, and in the following tank battle, Villers Bocage had been taken back. In the meantime, it had been bombed many times and was just a pile of ruins. With the 129th Brigade being occupied on the Bois du Homme, the 130th Brigade set out towards Honfontaine and Mont Pinçon. Now, the Germans concentrated their dwindling resources on easily defended targets, so the British troops could walk for some miles with no resistance, and then they'd come up against a strong point. Just before Labine, there were mines and small arms fire mortars. Labine took several hours to clear out. Just after Labine, night was falling, and so they stopped for the night. During the night, the Luftwaffe ventured out. They dropped some flares and then some anti-personnel bombs, but they missed the 4th Dorsets. On the 2nd of August, the commanders of the VIII Corp and the 7th Armoured Division were changed. Lieutenant General Horrocks replaced Lieutenant General Bucknell, and Brigadier Variniere replaced General Erskine. And many other officers were changed. That didn't really do much to improve the cohesion of the 7th Armoured. On the 4th, A Squadron of the Sherwood Rangers went into Honfontaine and reported it clear. The 4th Devons followed up, and they were stopped by machine gun fire and a Tiger tank. They went into Honfontaine on the 5th and found it empty. From here, there's Mont Pinçon straight ahead. The Duke of Cornwall's light infantry were following up, coming through Jerk. Sergeant Long and 2 men went across country to find roads to use. They found an abandoned farmhouse and went up into the attic. From there, they saw some Germans coming out of a shelter, and they started setting up a mortar. So they shot one, and the other Germans dashed back into their shelter. And Sergeant Long went off to his commanding officer, brought back a radio. They stayed in the attic throughout the night, waiting for the dawn. And as dawn broke, more Germans came out of their shelter, and they once again shot many of them. And then suddenly a German truck dashed up the road. The survivors jumped into it, and it disappeared down the road. On the 4th and 5th, Eberbach had decided to abandon Villers Bocage and Aulnay-sur-Odon. The new line of defence would go from Borgabou Ridge to Vire, passing by Mont Pinçon. In the early hours of the 5th of August, the 4th Wiltshires started out, carried on the tanks of B Squadron of the 13th, 18th Hussars. The 5th Wilts were on A Squadron tanks. The 4th Wilts set out from Fort Écuelle to Saint-Jean-le-Blanc. They had no resistance till after Lescure. They approached the bridge over the Druance. The bridge had been blown so the tanks couldn't cross. The infantry waded across and engaged the Germans firing from the cover of the woods. The engineers replaced the bridge, allowing the tanks to cross. By 1800 hours, the bridge area had been taken. Major Robbins took an artillery observer, Captain John Fletcher, up the hill towards the summit. They ran into 2 Germans with Schmeissers. Major Robbins was too slow, but the gunner shot one. The other took off down the hill. From their position they could see down to a company of Germans with tanks getting ready to counterattack. Captain Fletcher called down an artillery stonk and the group was dispersed. But the battle wasn't over. By the evening of the 5th, the whole battalion was over the Druance, but at 2100 hours, Robbins was told to pull out as Mont Pinçon was the objective, not Saint-Jean-le-Blanc. The cost of taking that ground they had then to leave cost 22 killed. The 5th Wilts were to move across country on the tanks of A Squadron, 25 to 30 to a tank. They'd be left at the crossroads near the Ferrier du Val. D Company moved across the fields to the north of the crossroads being that way. Mont Pinçon's that way. Sergeant King of 18 Platoon was wounded by a fire coming from those woods. When they cleared the woods out, they just found 2 stretcher bearers, and they were made to take Sergeant King back to the A station. And while they were on the way back, they came under fire, and one of the German stretcher bearers saved Sergeant King's life by throwing himself over his body, and he took a bullet in the back. They rode down to the bridge and Mont Pinçon in the distance. The tanks were to drop them at the crossroads, and then they would come down here, take the bridge, and then the crossroads at La Variniere, and then Mont Pinçon. There's no bridge here as such now. They've raised the road up, and the stream, which is the Roucon, goes through a tube. By 1944, this was a bridge. The troops crossed the bridge and moved a quarter of a mile up the road, but the Germans still held the bridge. At night time, they settled down around the crossroads, but Company D was still the other side of the bridge. The Major Thomas managed to get back to HQ and tell them they were surrounded, and he had permission for them to pull back. So he managed to get back again to Company D. But at 4 o'clock in the morning, they started approaching the bridge. And then as they approached the bridge, there was a cry, "Halt!" Major Thomas shouted, "Duck!" as he ran across the road. He was cut down. The rest of the company spread out both sides. And they just had to try and wade across the stream and get back to HQ. And most of them did. General Thomas of the Wessex had a new plan for Mont Pinçon. The 130th Brigade would make a feint attack from the north, and the 129th would make the assault from the west up the steepest slopes of Mont Pinçon. 7th Hampshires were to attack Roucon from the west, then turn towards Mont Pinçon from the north. The going was slow due to mortar fire and machine guns coming from Roucon. A Canadian officer with B Company advanced with a section and crossed the stream. They came up against a machine gun manned by 4 Germans. Taylor shot 2 and the others surrendered. The company wasn't following, so Taylor returned with their prisoners. An artillery barrage was laid down in preparation for another advance. For the 129th attack, the 5th Wiltshires, with A Squadron 1318 Hussars, were to attack through La Variniere onto the southwest slopes of Mont Pinçon. The Shropshires Light Infantry were to attack through the Roguerie to the northwest slopes of the hill, which were thought to be impassable to tanks. The Germans on the hillside waited for the Shropshires to break cover before opening fire with machine gun crossfire. Captain Clark was with an artillery observer with the Shropshires. He left his Bren carrier to creep forward They called back fire orders to Bombardier Bell, who managed to shoot up 2 machine guns. Then a mortar killed Captain Clark. On the 6th, the 5th Wiltshires had to attack the bridge again, which they'd done the day before, and then take Variniere, and then Mont Pinçon. Now the Hussars, the 13-18 Hussars, actually led them in their tanks, which tankers don't normally like to do. And so they approached the bridge. Zusa moved out with a machine gun and mortar fire coming at them. The smoke screen was laid down on the bridge. The tanks were firing across the bridge at the Germans. With the smoke screen in place, the engineers could take the mines off. Once the mines were removed, the troops could advance across the bridge. But just after the bridge, 2 companies were cut into by machine guns. Major Milne advanced too far and was taken prisoner. Lieutenant Colonel Pearson was trying to set an example. He advanced. He was shot by a sniper. Corporal Mackerel saw where the shot had come from. He sprayed the tree with his Sten gun and the sniper fell to the ground. Captain Peace, who'd taken command, was now told that their objective should be just La Variniere instead of Mont Pinçon. That would be some other troops. But La Variniere was still half a mile up the road. The artillery was laying down more covering fire. The tanks were still leading the way, with the infantry supporting them on either side. Some tanks had wanted to get off the road, but with the banks on each side, they couldn't. As they approached the houses near the Variniere, Germans started surrendering. With over 100 prisoners, they outnumbered the men of the Wilts. German prisoners were told to dig graves. They went very slowly, because they thought the graves were for them. It was explained to them that the graves were the dead soldiers. Just then Major Milne, who'd been taken prisoner, turned up. As his captors were marching him along, some shells came in and knocked them all over. He played dead, and the Germans ran away. HQ now told them that they were to stay put at the crossroads of the Variniere, and that the 4th Wilts were coming to assault Mont Pinçon. And they were 2 miles away, and it was already 1800 hours, so Lieutenant Colonel Vincent of the Hussars wasn't prepared to wait. His tanks were milling around, shooting at pockets of resistance, but they weren't sure how to get up the hill. And then Corporal Hennessy found this track. By radio, he was told to take it. Hennessy was just turning his tank towards the track when Corporal Hammond dashed past, waving to him. They raced up the track as if it was a game. Sergeant Rattle's tank slid off the track but didn't turn over. Once near the summit, they set down a smoke screen while the 7 tanks got into a hull down position. It was a pleasant summer evening, much more peaceful on the summit than down below. With the 7 Hants approaching from the easy road from the north, the Germans were caught off guard while the Hussars tanks raced up that track. They weren't completely at ease though. Tanks without infantry are vulnerable. They heard some Germans talking to the north, which is that way, and they fired a few shells over there, but they had to wait over 2 hours before the infantry joined them. Captain Robbie Neve of B Squadron knocked out 2 anti-tank guns sighted near this track to the northwest. Around 9 p.m, the Shropshires and tanks could now go up to join the tanks on the summit. A mist had descended. As they went up, they could hear German voices, but had no opposition. The 4th Wilts had to march 7 miles from their position near Saint-Jean-le-Blanc to the Variniere before they could start climbing Mont Pinçon. So it wasn't until 9 o'clock in the evening they started climbing. Once they got to the summit, they started digging in, and some of the men fell asleep on their shovels. On the morning of the 7th, the Germans sent 6 Panthers, 6 assault guns, and infantry to counterattack. Fortunately, they got lost and then ran into the shelling and gave up. C Squadron of the Hussars was leaguered near La Variniere. They knew a Jagdpanther was lurking not far away, waiting for enough light to attack. The squadron's tanks had their guns trained on the place it was bound to appear. As dawn broke, it lurched into sight and was stopped immediately. The much reduced 5th Wilts had stayed at La Variniere to hold it. This was vital, or Mont Pinçon couldn't be held. Throughout the day they fought off counterattacks and sometimes at grenade distance. Between La Variniere and Plessis Grimoult there was this abbey. It withstood the ravages of time, being a strong building. It attracted civilians to come and take shelter. Now the Germans used the tower, you can see over there, as a lookout. There was also a gun here which caused casualties to the troops going up from the southwest corner on Mont Pinçon. On Mont Pinçon they fired at it and missed, and then Trooper Triolet, he said, "Could I try?" And he took out the striker and he bore sighted the barrel at the tower. Then they fired it and they hit it. Now that plus all the other shelling caused some casualties and the death of a young boy. There was a German doctor here treating the German casualties, and he looked at the boy. He said he needs operating on, but he said, "I can't spend the time, I've got so many casualties to see to," and the boy died.
The 7th Armoured Division were advancing from the ruins of Aulnay-sur-Odon towards Saint-Georges-de-Groseilles. Plessis Grimoult had to be cleared.
The 5th Duke of Cornwall's Light Infantry was to attack from La Variniere and from Mont Pinçon. Approaching from the north, A Company knocked out some outposts, then raked houses with their stens and used grenades. Round a corner, they saw 2 King Tigers. One was being loaded up from a lorry. The Germans were smoking and talking casually. They didn't realise the British were there. Their Piat had been knocked out, so they used a mortar. The first bomb fell on the truck. All the ammunition exploded and the Tiger caught fire. The other one disappeared. They fought their way through the town, which resisted for 20 minutes, then took 94 prisoners. Not bad for a force of 40 men.
It was the 7th of August. Operation Lutish was just starting. The failure of Lutish would lead to the collapse of the German resistance in Normandy and formation of the Falaise Pocket.